Well, hello, confirmands. We have made it. We survived this crazy COVID year. This is year 3, lesson 25, the final lesson of year 3. We're talking tonight about the rights and responsibilities of church members. Last time we talked about how you pick a church, how you know if it's really a church, how you decide whether or not it's a place you want to invest your time, your money, your sacred honor. And now, if you think you found a church, it's a real church, the sacraments are rightly administered, the gospel is rightly preached. Well, what are your rights? What can you expect there? And what are your responsibilities? Because church membership has both rights and responsibilities. Before we get any farther, the first word of this final phrase that pays is kind. Kind, K-I-N-D. All right, so when you join a church, you have the right to safety for you and your kids, right? The church has to be aware that abuse happens and that abuse happens in churches. You've read the newspaper, you've heard the stories that I've heard, that it happens in churches, that there's a bad pastor or bad Sunday school teachers or a bad youth director that hurt kids, that hurt vulnerable people. So the church has to be aware that that happens. The church has to have policies and procedures in place that protect people, especially vulnerable people, from being abused, and not just sexually. Sexual abuse, spiritual abuse, physical abuse, financial abuse. There's lots of ways to hurt people. There's lots of ways to take advantage of people. And the church that you join, you have the right to know that they've got systems and policies in place to protect people from all of those things. And a final thing is, you have the right to expect, as part of safety, that your confidential information is going to stay confidential. That stuff you say you're not going to hear out on the street. That information about your financial giving isn't going to show up in conversations at the tavern. That you have a right to safety. You have a right to honesty and integrity from lay leaders. Those are non-ordained people, non-pastors. And you have a right to honesty, integrity from the pastors, from the ordained leaders. Right? That you deserve to know straight up that the laws of the state and the nation are going to be followed, obeyed, that things are going to be done right, that there is a real care about making sure that everything done is legal. There are some times when church people decide to disobey the law, like, for example, during the civil rights movement, where people would sit in at segregated counters, or they would help people register to vote, even though that was technically that they weren't supposed to do that. So if you belong to a church where people intentionally break the law because they think it's unjust, then they have to be prepared for the consequences of that. So there's an awareness that the law matters, and that if I break it, I'm gonna have consequences. And just remember that honesty, integrity don't mean that you get to hear everything, you get to know everything. Now, the church probably has a personnel committee, and if someone gets fired, you don't deserve to know why they got fired. That's a private matter. If you want to know why people are getting fired, or why people are getting raises or not getting raises, well, then you put your time in leadership until you get onto the personnel committee, and then you can know. So the deal is honesty from elected and ordained leaders. Understand they can't tell you everything, but everything they do tell you should be true. All right. You have a right to know the doctrinal and denominational beliefs of the church. Your first day, they should be able to tell you, this is what we believe. They should be able to hand you a book or books saying, this is what we believe, and you have the right to expect that everything that's taught and preached there will be in keeping with their identity, that it doesn't sway hither and yon, it doesn't go back and forth, that they'll tell you who they are and then they'll be who they are. You have the right to a certain kind of pastor. Pastors make mistakes. Pastors are people. I make mistakes, right? But you have a right to a certain kind of pastor that's personally stable, sexually stable, doesn't have a secret life. right? We've heard more about that this year too. You know, these fancy pastors, Justin Bieber's pastor having affairs and other pastors in that church. You deserve a pastor that has a stable life. You deserve a pastor, you have a right to a pastor that life doesn't bring disgrace to the church. That people in town don't say, how could you go to that church with that pastor? That you have a right to a pastor that doesn't use connections to church members to run a side business or to sell insurance or to take advantage of people, right? No exploitation of members or those relationships. That's not what the job is for. You deserve a pastor that's properly educated, properly vetted, and properly credentialed, right? And in different churches, that'll mean different things. But in my church, in our church, it means that I have a Master of Divinity degree from an approved seminary, that I've gone through the candidacy process and I've been accepted by the ELCA as a candidate for ordained ministry, and that I've passed criminal background checks, and that I have an ongoing relationship with the church, so that you know that I'm not an active danger to you. You deserve a pastor that's willing to be accountable, right? I can be disciplined, I can be removed for cause, my bishop can end my career, and that's the way it should be. If I become a danger to you or to the congregation, I should be removed, and I shouldn't be, bundled off to some other church where I can hurt other people. You deserve a pastor that won't do that. And you deserve a pastor that will tell you how to get in touch with his or her denominational superiors or accountability figures. If you come and ask me, how do I get in touch with your bishop, I will tell you. And it's a problem if I don't. You have all of those rights. The second word on the phrase that pays is words. W-O-R-D-S, words. You also have the right to know what the expectations of the pastor are. I mean, what did the church hire this person for, right? So how many hours is pastor going to be working in exchange for the money that they're getting paid? Some pastors have part-time calls. Pastor Gretchen is officially a half-time pastor. She works more than that, but she's a half-time person. I'm a full-time person. You deserve to know that, right? You want to know how much I get paid? It's printed in the annual report every year. It's part of the council meeting every month. There are no secrets about it, right? You can know anytime you want what the priority list is in my letter of call. You deserve to know what the pastor's supposed to be doing. If you have a pastor who's sitting in Starbucks, every morning, all morning, reading the newspaper and playing on his phone, unless his letter of call says that you will be available in the community as an ambassador of our congregation, that's a problem. Maybe they're a half-time person, then it's not a problem. But you deserve to know what's going on. You deserve a pastor that's well prepared for worship and other events so that you don't feel embarrassed if you bring someone to church or to a church event. You have the right to know whether or not you will be visited in the hospital. How often will you be visited, right? What if you're in a hospital in another state? Then what? But you have a right to know all these things. You have a right to know if you can meet with your pastor and what it will cost. You want to meet with me, it's free. Right? There are other pastors in the community that if you want to meet with them, it's $50, right? Or they hand you an envelope and say, make a donation in keeping with the time I'm spending with you. That's not our deal. You have a right to know if your pastor provides counseling, if they have any training in the area that they're counseling, and what that costs. You have a lot of rights between you and the pastor. You have the right to know what the expectations of members are. What's expected of you? What's demanded of you? It should be written down someplace. It should be clear. You have the right to know what sort of disciplinary process there is for members. You can't do anything and be a member of a church in good standing, right? But if you're interfering with the peace of the congregation, or if you're promulgating false doctrine, or if you're starting fights, or if your life has become a disgrace to the church, how does discipline work? How does it look? What are your rights? Who makes the final decision? You should be able to know all of that. And don't join a church that can't tell you that on the first day. I can tell you today what discipline process would look like for me and for you, and you're entitled to that. You're entitled to a church that has financial transparency, accountability, and follows the best practices, right? You should be able to get accurate records in a timely fashion if you need them for your taxes or for some other purpose. And you should be assured that if you put $1 in the offering plate, that you know exactly who touches that dollar, who records that dollar, where that dollar goes, and how you can be sure that that's how that dollar goes. The deal isn't that, you put money in a plate and I stick it in my pocket. You don't want any part of a church like that. You want a church where you know where the money's going. You want to know, and you have the right to know, that when you're a member of a church that supported charities and missions and evangelistic enterprises are faithful and honest and effective, and that they don't harm the people that they're supposed to be helping. We talked a little bit about this last week in a couple of the groups, but you deserve to know where benevolence is money that goes out of the church, where that money goes, what it's being used for. Is it being used for political purposes, mission purposes, evangelism, and exactly how it's being used? There's good evangelism and bad evangelism. There's faithful missions and there's unfaithful missions, right? And you have the right to know. You have the right to know as a church member that there's policies and procedures in place so that church employees are treated humanely and justly, and that they're compensated fairly. You don't want to be a part of a church that takes advantage of people, that hurts people. And you have the right to know who's in charge, how it works, what's going on. And finally, if you decide you don't want to be in that church anymore, you have the right to leave without being harassed, without people calling you names or running you down or assassinating your character. You can leave if you choose to leave in this church. And if I see you in the grocery store, I'm going to say hello to you still. I'm still going to care about you. You have the right to leave. How do you know when it's time to leave? Well, one of my teachers said that you stay in a church until the Spirit's voice can't be heard anymore. If the church is so far from the stuff we talked about last week, right, preaching the gospel rightly and administering the sacraments properly, that you can't hear the Spirit's voice anymore, it's time to go. Or it's time to go if you feel a real call to another church, to a leading to another church, that there's a reason, a godly reason for you to join this other church. Okay, then you can leave a church, and you deserve to be treated fairly when you leave a church. Let me just say a couple other things. If you leave a church, leave well. Don't burn bridges. Don't tell people that they're not really a church. None of this sending people gospel tracts. It happens. Someone will leave a church and then they'll start sending gospel tracts to everyone in the mail. Like, in that church, there's no Jesus anymore. Don't do stuff like that. Leave with thanks. Say goodbye to people. Give people a chance to say goodbye to you, right? And when you leave, really leave. Don't dabble. If people want to talk to you about the pastor, I'm sorry, I'm not a member of that church anymore. I'll pray for you. But do you want to hear what he did? No, I don't. It's not my business anymore. I don't belong to Church A. I now belong to Church B. So please don't gossip about your pastor to me. I'll pray for all of you. So leave well, leave with thanks, really leave, and stay gone. Don't drift back and forth. If you come back to visit, for a confirmation or something, be a good guest. You don't have any opinions anymore about whether the church is doing it right. You left. You get that. You understand that. Those are your rights. Those are your rights. Now, you have responsibilities too. Responsibilities is stuff you have to do. Before we get into them, the third word in this week's phrase that pays is cost. C-O-S-T, cost. All right. You have the responsibility to participate in the means of grace, to do the stuff that gets you God's blessing, right? So you have a responsibility to attend worship, not just Christmas and Easter, baby. You got to be in church. You got to be in church several times a month. Is it 4? For me, it's got to be 4. 3? Yeah, 3's a good number. 2? but you're going to come to church. You're going to partake of the sacraments, right? You're going to develop a devotional life. This is the thing that we're trying to work on with the daily readings. But that you're going to have a system in your life where you are reading and studying and thinking and growing in an intentional kind of way. That you're going to develop a prayer life, that you're going to work on having a prayer life. It matters. And you're going to be committed to continuing to learn and grow. You're not going to say, I got confirmed back there in, well, ninth graders, I got confirmed back there in 2021. I don't need to do anything else. No, you got to study, you got to grow, you got to learn, you got to worship, you got to participate in the sacraments. So participate in the means of grace. That's your responsibility. Otherwise, why'd you join the church, right? You have to support the church with your time and with your energy. That's expected. That you volunteer for stuff, that you lead something. There's something going on in the church that you care about, that you can make happen. Whether that's social events for the members, or some mission emphasis, or keeping up the property, or helping people who are lonely, or visiting people who are shut in, or starting a prison ministry, or working in the food shelf. I mean, there's stuff to do. This is a world that's deeply broken, or hadn't you noticed? Find something in conversation with your pastor. Start working. And then show up. Show up cheerful. Right? Not if you've just experienced a loss, then show up in tears. But don't show up grumbly, don't show up demanding, don't show up mad, don't show up mean, don't show up condescending or judgmental or arrogant or rude. Show up cheerful and do something for the sake of the kingdom. You have a responsibility to support the church financially with your money. Not $1 a week. That doesn't cut it. To make a real financial contribution to the church, you need to remember that you don't have any money. If you make $10 million a year, you don't have any money. It's all God's money. God gave you the gifts that you used to make that money. God gave you the family support. He gave you the teachers that taught you. He gave you the intellect to memorize and learn stuff. He gave you the body and the strength to actually do it. It's all God's money. In the Old Testament, the rule was that the people of God gave 10%. 10%. Easy. You make $100,000, you give the church $10,000. You make $2,000, you give the church, math, what is it? $20. No, that's 1%. $200. $200. Right? Whatever it is you make, you just take 1 0 off, and that's what you pay. Now that's the Old Testament. The New Testament raises the bar. The New Testament says that we're supposed to give in proportion to what we've received. Jesus gave you life. He gave you eternal life. So 10% has got to be the floor, not the ceiling. Whatever it is, start. You want to start at 3%? Start at 3%. Make sure you give that 3%. Next year, go to 5. The year after that, go to 7.5. The year after that, go to 10. Go up as fast as you can. We can talk about why. There are really important reasons for why you want to be a tither, why you want to give this money to your church. We can talk about that at any time. You have the right to know why that's the deal. But then you have the responsibility to live into it too, right? If you're going to join a church, you have the responsibility to support it financially in real sacrificial ways, right? Otherwise, don't join. You have the responsibility to support your pastors. Okay, so, I know this is self-serving, this part, but let me tell you about your pastor. Where were we last week? Did we talk about the Elmwood Avenue Church in Erie, Pennsylvania? Was that the example I used? It doesn't exist, by the way. I made it up. If it does exist, wow. But you have the responsibility to support the pastors there financially. Their compensation should reflect their training, their hours, their responsibilities, and their level of commitment, right? That your pastor, if it's an ELCA pastor, has a college degree and a 4-year master's degree and has devoted their life to doing this work, and you have an obligation to support them. You need to insist that your pastor's responsibilities are reasonable and sustainable. Just because something could be done doesn't mean you force your pastor to do it. right? Maybe you need another pastor. Maybe we need someone who's not a pastor, but a specialist in this thing that you think needs to be done. But that you are aware that your pastor has the same number of hours that you do, and the same responsibilities to family, to parents, to children, to their health, to their community. So you're going to make sure that their job description is reasonable and sustainable, that they can do it over time. You're going to insist that your pastor take their days off and their vacations. The temptation in a church is that we're happy when our pastors don't take care of themselves by taking days off and vacations. You be the voice the other way. If when you hired that pastor, you offered sabbaticals, a sabbatical is a block of study time every 3 to 5 years, depending on the church, right? If you offered that, then make sure it happens. Make sure your pastor takes her sabbatical. It was part of what you promised her when you called her. To not let her take her sabbatical is to take advantage of her. And then there's some rules. While your pastor's off on her sabbatical, don't squawk about the extra work that the congregation has to do and the extra expense to bring in a pastor to cover some things. While your pastor's gone, you made this decision when you called her. So don't squawk about it. It's not her fault. It's your fault. Right? Keep the peace while the pastor's gone, and don't change anything while she's gone. Pastors don't take sabbaticals for a lot of reasons, right? They don't want people to be talking bad about them. They don't want, people saying, "Oh, you have a good vacation." They don't want to come back to a war. They don't want to come back to everything's different, that people waited till the pastor left and then changed everything. No. That's not the deal. If you promised a pastor when you called him that he's entitled to a sabbatical, then keep your promises. Simple as that. Watch over and protect your pastor's physical health, right? If I'm getting way too fat, tell me you're worried about me. Tell me that you think I need to take better care of myself. Figure out with the council, should we be paying for a gym membership? What's the problem? What's going on with Pastor D? Look at him, he's going to die on us. We don't want that, right? Be friendly with your pastor, but understand that there's limitations to your pastor's friendship to you. You know how when you have a really good friend, you can tell them anything? I can't do that with anyone here, right? I can't. There's always going to be a difference in what comes my way and what comes your way, because I'm not first and foremost your friend. I'm your pastor who aspires to be friendly. We can talk more about that if you want to, right? Be accountable to your pastor. Listen to your pastor. If your pastor corrects you, that's part of your pastor's job. Don't punish them for correcting you. I mean, if you're living in open sin, if you're doing something stupid or evil, your pastor's job is to say, "Hey, I'm watching you and I'm worried about you," right? That doesn't mean that you put on Facebook that your pastor's a Nazi and a troll, right? That's part of the deal. Be aware that the last thing your pastor needs is another critical voice. I got lots of people telling me all of the things that I'm doing wrong and all of the things that are wrong. I don't need you to join that choir. I'm already hearing it. Try to be grateful for your pastor and protect your pastor from the attacks of others. There was a time in another church where people were gossiping about me. It was just brutal. It was just awful. And one person who was gossiping made the mistake of going and talking to a woman. I won't give you her name because, it's a small world. But tried to tell this woman the things that I was allegedly doing. And she said, I think that's wrong. I think that's a lie. You should not say that. I'm going to check with the pastor and with the council and the bishop. And in the meantime, I want you to stop spreading that story. Wow. You can do that. You can be that brave. All right, other responsibilities. You have the responsibility to accept and follow the community's rules. Here we have a constitution. If you join the church, you're on board with doing what the Constitution says in the way the Constitution says it should be done. You don't make stuff up. You don't try to cut corners. You don't go around the edges. Right? You don't get sneaky. You signed on. So you sign on to the rules, right? The rules protect our community and the rules keep things safe for everyone. You have the responsibility to support the elected leaders in this place. It's very difficult to get people to serve on church council. It's very difficult to get people to serve on committees because they have full lives. They're busy. They're struggling, right? They're working a job or two, right? And it's very difficult. And if they're just going to get kicked around, if they're just going to get gossiped about and run down, why would anyone in their right mind do that? So you're going to support your elected leaders. You're going to accept that they're going to know things that you don't. Again, if somebody gets fired, the officers of the church know why they got fired, but you don't pump them for that. You're not entitled to that. They're entitled to that. When you elected them so they could make sure that people got treated fairly and humanely, but that's it, right? You're going to pray for them and you're going to respect them because of their offices. You have a responsibility to live a certain kind of life. A life of decorum and peace. Decorum is this, that you do things right. You do things the way they should be done. You do things properly. So you're going to live a life of decorum and peace. You're going to acknowledge that you don't always get what you want, but you're not going to complain. You're not going to whine. You're not going to, lay on the floor and kick your heels like a big baby. Right? That's. Sometimes we don't get what we want. I do not get everything I want from my bishop, and I respect my bishop. It's the way the world is, right? You got to consider your social media presence very, very carefully. Don't put crazy stuff on your social media. I think you should stay away from politics by and large on your social media. You certainly should stay away from dirty stuff. You certainly should stay away from stuff about drugs or alcohol or misbehaviors. You represent Jesus and you represent the church that you've joined. Clean it up. Think about not having a social media site or using it like grandma uses it, just to post family pictures and recipes, right? You want to be like grandma on Facebook? Who could argue with that? That's fine, right? Don't gossip. Don't allow conflicts, and there will be some in every church, to damage the public witness of the church. Right? If there's a church fight going on, fight fair, fight like Jesus would fight. Shut up about it out in the world. The world doesn't need to know that we're having a fight about something, right? That's our business. We'll get to the end of it. We'll still love each other. We'll work it out. But let's not burn down our reputation in the town while we're in the middle of a struggle. And, church struggles are about a lot of stuff. What does the gospel mean that we should do? Should we spend this money? What does it mean that we don't have this program? Right? Is the pastor we have, does that pastor need retraining, or do we need to ask that pastor to find another ministry somewhere else? These are all really emotional things. If we're in the middle of a fight, don't destroy our reputation in the town, right? Protect your church. Remember, if you want to think more about this, go to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, where the Apostle Paul says, sometimes it's better to be wronged than to destroy the reputation of the church. The final thing you have a responsibility to do is to increasingly to live like Jesus and to bind your freedom for the sake of other people. That we who follow Jesus are supposed to love like Jesus loved and worry less and less about our own rights and our own freedoms and our own prerogatives and more about the rights and freedoms and prerogatives of others. Jesus says, if you'd be my disciple, take up your cross and follow me. You have a responsibility as a member of a church to try to do exactly that. It's a lot, isn't it? So when we get back together, we're going to talk about all of these things. We're going to work on these things. The questions, what do you want to talk more about? Rights and responsibilities. You'll see them on the sheet. You'll also see there's a place for the phrase that pays, and you need the last word of the phrase that pays, which is, of course, nothing. Nothing. Nothing is the final word of the phrase that pays. I'll see you Wednesday. Congratulations, you have made it through year 3, the weirdest confirmation year of my career. You take care. Bye-bye.